to day 2 of this year's Lit and Blues Festival. We're excited to be with hosts Maya Marshall and Marty McConnell, co-founders of the online journal Underbelly, a journal on the practical magic of poetic revision. I'm your host, Joel Craig, poet and artistic associate at the Lit and Blues Festival. This year's Lit and Blues Festival features both in-person events in Chicago and virtual events at Central East. Please visit our website, litblues.org. Now in its 9th cycle, Make Literary Productions Lit and Blues Festival of Language, Literature, and Art supports the creation of new art through international collaboration and makes space for essential dialogues between residents of Mexico and the United States. This year's festival theme, Revision, or re-envisioning the arts in light of the pandemic, reconsidering the canon, and revising language for the future. Please check out our remaining virtual events, including this Thursday's conversation in partnership with University of Illinois of Chicago's Center for Latinx Literature of the Americas, featuring Ruben Quesada, editor of the forthcoming Latinx Poetics, Essays on the Art of Poetry, as well as contributors Cheryl Luna and Irene Lara Silva. It will be hosted by Daniel Borzutsky. Maya Marshall is the author of All the Blood Involved in Love and co-founder of Underbelly, the journal on the practical magic of poetic revision. Marshall has taught at Emory University, Northwestern University, and Loyola University Chicago, and holds fellowships from McDowell and Cave Canem, among others. You can find her writing in Boston Review, Crazy Horse, Best New Poets, and elsewhere, and she is an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Adelphi University. Part of the vanguard of poets fusing and refusing and queering the delineations between literary and oral poetry, Marty McConnell's work blurs the lines between autobiography and personae to comment on and illuminate what it means to live and love outside the lines in 21st century America. McConnell's second poetry collection, When They Say You Can't Go Home Again, What They Mean Is You Were Never There, won the 2017 Michael Walters Poetry Prize. Her first nonfiction book, Gathering Voices, Creating a Community-Based Poetry Workshop, was published by Yes Yes Books. She is the author of Wine for a Shotgun, which received the silver medal in the Independent Publishers Awards and was a finalist for both the Audre Lorde Award and the Lambda Literary Awards. She is also a 7-time National Poetry Slam team member and 2012 National Underground Poetry Individual Competition champion, and appeared twice on HBO's Def Poetry Jam. She is also a co-creator and co-editor of Underbelly. Underbelly will soon drop its 14th issue. Simply going to the homepage, you see a list of some of the most important and exciting voices in American poetry today. Ada Limon, Tea Himba Jess, Noor Hindi, Wa Win, Nate Marshall. The list goes on and on and on. So Marty and Maya, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Underbelly. And maybe I'll just start us off with a simple question. Revision is probably one of the things that is most deeply personal to a poet and their process, and probably the hardest thing to figure out. So what was the idea behind showing an earlier, perhaps first version of a poem alongside the completed poem?
I'm unmuted, so I can start. You know, the idea to have the journal at all, you know, really came out of Sorry, there's a weird echo.
Really come out of
Sorry, there's a weird echo.
really come out of
Okay, maybe that'll do it. I was hearing everything I said 3 times, which is like revision, but not. So yeah, Maya and I have long had extensive, deeply nerdy conversations around the writing and revision and teaching of poetry. And one of the things that continuously came up was the fact that because we only really have access to, generally speaking, the final version of poems, there's this tendency, particularly for amongst newer writers, to believe that these poems sort of emerge fully formed out of the genius minds of poets, and maybe they mull it a little bit, and then it sort of comes to be. And so the difficulty of having that revision process be invisible, was something that we thought a lot about. And when we would have conversations, we would oftentimes say, I wonder how they came to this point, or I wonder how this began. And that was something that came up also in conversations in various settings where we were teaching. So we thought, why don't we just get versions and put them on the internet? What am I missing, Maya? Say something smarter.
I'll say something equally smart because that's how we do things around here. Yeah, I think so much of the fear around poetry is this expectation or this like belief that that perfection is somehow attainable, and that like maybe clarity is somehow secondary. I think when we see our heroes alongside the sort of strings behind their, you know, their theatrical performances and their poems, we allow them to be more human, and it feels more possible for us to achieve, uh, the sort of seeming perfection. Um, is that echo still there, or are we good? Okay.
I think we have to be sort of one unmuted at a time.
That sounds right to me. I just mean to say all of the magician's tricks can be revealed, and that means that more people can be magicians. So it's helpful to just see where things began, so that the end seems possible and insight for new writers, newer writers, and folks who've been at it for decades too.
I think that's really like an important thing is how much effort goes into the craft of poetry itself, but also to figuring out what your voice is over time. And revision is something that is very tactile. You can try to explain it to someone, but they really have to go in and figure it out for themselves. Do you have an early memory of when that first clicked for you, that suddenly a voice on the page could become something else or a different version of you, and that there was power in that?
I mean, I I'm just laughing because I've always been this person. There's something that my mom had found where in second grade we wrote out sort of like a story about ourselves, and there's a drawing, and in it I had drawn my goldfish, and I had put my goldfish is orange and beautiful, and then I had crossed out orange and written golden above it. So like 7-year-old me was like, how do we revise this? Always been this person.
Um, I think, I started writing poems on big pieces of butcher paper when I was a kid. And I was more about the story and the feeling than anything else, but I didn't really begin to revise or try to change the voices on the page until I was an adult. And I did this exercise that I still use all the time that I love, which is called the negative image, where you just replace every word on in someone else's poem with the opposite of that word, and then revise until the whole thing makes sense. Um, which made me sort of loosen my kung fu grip on every sentence I wrote down. I was like, oh, it's a bag of words. Cool. I'll just rearrange them like it's magnetic poetry and then find what I mean to say somewhere in the lines. And that was just really freeing. Like I didn't have to come to the page with the expectation that I would say exactly what I had been thinking about all week or whatever. I could discover things.
That's a wonderful description that revision is an empowering space because there is nothing finalized about it, and it is purely a place for exploration. You own that space for exploration, and you're not beholden to anyone else's expectations. But are there ever times that you do maybe feel you are beholden to those expectations and you have to find your way out of it through that process? Or are there times when you might invite people in to view that process that may have inspired Underbelly, where maybe you need some support?
I mean, maybe on the occasion of writing an occasional poem, one wants to get it right. Like, oh, my friends are getting married. What is it that I might say? And this epithalamium for them, that feels equal to the moment or not sappy or something. But also there's not, like that's a type of poem, the epithalamium, but there's no real form to it. You just sort of know the right details, or you probably shouldn't write for that particular couple. I mean, to your second question, I sort of regularly look to the people we publish in Underbelly for examples. Like, what did you do? Maybe I can try that too.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think, that's not something I did before Underbelly existed. I just happened to read every single line of it because that's the cool part of my gig.
Were there any instances in putting Underbelly together where the transition from the early draft to the final really surprised you? That you wanted to understand a shift that was made, perhaps, or a decision that was made?
I mean, so people have really taken, it's been really interesting to see the different approaches that folks have taken to our base request of send us an early version, send us whatever you consider to be final or the most final version, and then, a micro essay about it. Some folks have gone they go all the way back to their notebooks and send us pictures of it, sort of scrawled out. And others are sort of, well, the one I have is sort of in the middle, that's like the earliest draft I have, right? And then, but they each then like reveal something different about the process, right? When we look at sort of particularly typed versions from, say, a midstream version to the final, we oftentimes are looking at sort of fine tuning, right? It might be like some subtle line break shifts or punctuation changes or shifts in the text. And we're always trying to reinforce to folks as they send to us that we don't just need, I think it's also oftentimes tempting for folks to be like, oh, I'm going to go with this one where it was like a radical transformation over the process. From its initial sort of conception to the final. And that's awesome for us to see, but we're also emphasizing to people that it's incredible to be able to see the tinkering, right? The little changes. And some folks have sent us, 6 iterations of the same poem, so we can really track across it. Tayimba sent us like 20, and we were like, okay, we can only do like 5. Thanks. You know,
Yeah.
but it really did, allow us to sort of like put up a series that allows you to see the poem evolve over time.
Are there specific things in seeing these multiple versions for either of you that really stand out? Like, I think the first thing I look for is like, how does the musicality or the rhythm develop, and what is the tinkering there? But I mean, there's so many different pieces of what go into a final piece and the mood of it, that can flip and change so quickly just with one decision.
I'm always fascinated to read the micro essays, right? Like it's one thing to sit and look at the first draft and the final draft and say, oh, okay, they've changed these verbs, or, it's no longer a prose block, it's now lineated. It's another thing for someone to say, I was in a reading, like a book group, and we were talking about, like dom and femme power. And so I realized I'd given no agency to the pedal in this poem. It was just being, acted upon by the bee. Let me find a way to give agency to this pedal so that, the ethics and the personal politics come through in this shift of gesture and imagery and agency where the action happens. So that's what I was taken by this round with Jenny Johnson's poem in the latest issue.
Yeah, the micro essay really, like, it's one thing to look at sort of the structure, right? To look at it and be able to see the early version of the final version, but it's still, without the micro essay, sort of leaves the question of like, but why did they make that change? What was the thinking behind that? And oftentimes also in the micro essays, we get information about the genesis of the poem, right? Like this is where the poem sort of sprang from. And then sort of, and sometimes some context, what was happening, what they were thinking about, who they were reading, who they bounced the poem off of, that sort of thing, all of which are just such gifts. And I think one of the things that comes out frequently in those micro essays is the idea of really balancing a kind of rigor in the revision, right? Really saying like, I'm going to hang with this poem until it sort of coheres or falls apart and then has to recohere, with a sense of sort of, like Joel, you had mentioned the idea of like exploration and play. Maya and I used to, for a while, we're running Underbelly workshops where it was called Break Your Poem. And it was just like, come break your poem, bring a draft and we will, do an activity where we cut it up, or we do the negative image practice like Maya is talking about, or whatever it is, just with this idea of like, remove the preciousness from it so that the poem can, loosen up enough to sort of emerge in whatever format it wants to, and come out of that initial idea of like, what it is that I want for this poem. Where is it that I want this to be going? And also not to, it's a way, I think what we see often in these iterations of the poem is poets doing that, like letting go of what their initial desire for the poem was, and also letting go of this idea that somehow each step of revision has to linearly make the poem quote unquote better, right? Somehow, it's going to be a process of gradual improvement until you have the perfect iteration of this poem, right? Instead, it's often elliptical, and you'll see folks like expand the poem out and shrink it down and try it one way and try it another way. Which are always, I think, of letting go of this perfectionist control idea of revision. So it's really fun to see people move through that process.
I think you're getting at this other constant, and that is that no poem is revised the same way every time. That we just try all of our little checklists until some discovery happens. you know, and that means that you have to feel or be comfortable sort of wandering through the field until you come upon, you know, some particularly interesting hole.
Yeah, we had asked, in the first few issues, we were sort of asking folks, how do you typically revise? I think was a question that we were asking. What are your standard revision processes? And we dropped that because people were like, for the most part, saying they don't have a stand, like it's about coming to the poem, on some level that's like saying, well, how do you raise your children? Well, you need to go to each child individually, and you might have some standard practices like, oh, I do conscious parenting, or I do attachment parenting, or I'm a insane helicopter parent, whatever it is. I don't know what choices people make. I don't have children. It's a bad analogy, but this idea of coming to each poem individually to sort of say, okay, like let's get in relationship with each other. Let's figure out like how are we going to work together so that you can be the best, most effective poem in the world that you want to be, and I'll try to get out of the way, or get in the way in a great, messy sort of way. So,
as a spoken word performer, have any stories come out in this editing process where like stress testing a piece with an audience had a big impact on revision?
I don't think, Maya, correct me if I'm wrong. I really haven't heard anyone sort of talking about that in their micro essays, but it's something that comes up in conversation with some frequency. And I would say just as frequently with folks who wouldn't define themselves as performers, as anything else, that I hear a lot of folks say, I read my poems out loud to myself in the writing process, or I read it out loud to friends, or I go to, events, and it is like hearing the poem in space, figuring out, a phrase might feel initially like it flows on the page, and then you go to say it out loud and you're like, that I cannot get that out of my mouth, so which might be great. You might say, oh, I want to keep that, right? Because it's a line about great difficulty. And I like that it feels difficult to get out. Or you might say, that is not how I want this line to feel, So yeah, I definitely think that engaging when we say, we're reading a poem out loud and we're getting feedback on it, often it is a way to somatically experience the poem, to have the poem in the body in a way that sometimes reading it on the page allows us to kind of step back and, approach it from a primarily intellectual standpoint.
Now, that's interesting. Like poems are so tactile and sometimes very instinctual. And like, I find that revision process, at times can be intellectually rigorous, but oftentimes it's just very much, I need to rely on the tool set that I have and trust the experience going forward. And I, don't want to ever make assumptions about how other people work, but that feels very natural. So is there, both of you teach, and so how do you teach the revision process? Because I also feel like it is an epiphany that people need to arrive at on their own. So what do you work at, or what tools do you have to get less experienced poets to find that space?
Well, it's a lot of the semester for me, and I work in a university, so in a fairly formal space. But I want to remind them always that writing is for discovery, not so much for declaration. This is where we go to find out what it is we think and feel. And our project and being poets is to use sound to get into other people's bodies, right? We're making sort of little sculptures that other bodies react to. And so let's see what happens when we try this thing. I am often talking about the writer's process with people who do not think of themselves as writers, but who are in a writing space for 15 weeks or so. And so I say, fake it for the semester. This semester, you're a writer because you are writing things. And you lose nothing. So get your Google Doc or your Microsoft Word file and just copy and paste today's above the last one. So you get to keep your very first draft if you want. You don't have to lose anything. Yeah, the poet Nicole Homer just created a series of workshop as play or at revision as play exercises that are 3 to 7 minutes long. And so we make a big file and try each of those exercises on all of them. I try to have 3 revision workshop days where we just come into the workshop like we're in a carpentry shop and move stuff around until we get something new. And they say, oh, okay. Oh, this is how I can think about syntax. Oh, yeah, I did cut out a bunch of syllables, and I guess I just got rid of extra language. I didn't know that I could do that in 5 different ways or whatever. And then they start to think of, metaphor as something that's active and not ornamental. You have to change 3 of your lines, but you have an extended metaphor. You have to think, oh, this metaphor is supposed to be saying something about whatever it is that's my subject. So those are some things I'm trying out. We'll see how it goes over the next forever.
That's great, and I appreciate the resonance of the tactile there, and just that it is discovery. I feel like in my early poetry writing experience, it was easy to view the poem as a commodified thing, and that there was this resolute way to view it. But I just love hearing about it as a discovery, because I agree with that. And speaking of which, how would you guys like to share some of your work today? Perfect. Who would like to go first?
Well, just so you know, Maya and I decided in the spirit of Underbelly that we would read, each of us are going to read an early version and a final-ish, a more revised version of a poem. So that's what you're in for.
Perfect.
Maya, you want to go first?
Sure. Do you want to volley back and forth, or shall we just each read 2?
Let's do the poems close together.
What does that mean, my love?
Do your poems, then I'll do my poems.
Okay. Okay. I have written poems. I will read them to you. So since I was talking about the negative image, I will read one of mine. It is, I made my bag of words out of a poem by Henri Cole called The Mosquito Mother. And then I decided I wanted to use lexicon-specific language. I just wanted to use words from a particular hobby. So there are some words from fishhooks. This is the first draft after the negative imaging. Anatomy of a fishhook. I gather your gush. You fix my mouth as you lure me in. Our other selves stand in a doorway eyeing us. Inside, here, is a flurry of embers. My touch amuses you. Down, up, hard, quiet. It's close, you whisper. My palm bends your knee. You remain whole as a mercy. Your pleasure climbs with unequaled restraint, only the briefest flinch of your nostrils, an exhale, a dry, cool lip confused by the surfeit, salt, water, stones, saliva, fructose. Ask yourself, are you sadder here outside your alliances, weaning me from your thigh, hung on and a soulless coming, a half presence salting powdered ricin around you? Somebody's near. Internal fear dictating like when, with a king's ransom, a tongue, paradise, you could hide your life, divide it from a kitchen table circled with closed mouths. End me. My palm, a barb transfixed, your soluble pink ever reeling me in. All right, and here's the final draft that ended up in this year book. Anatomy of a fishhook. I fix my mouth to gather you, as our other selves stand in a doorway eyeing us. Inside, here, is a flurry of embers. My touch amuses you. Down, up, hard, quiet, I'm close, you whisper. I palm your knee, stroke your throat, and you remain whole as a mercy. You are unequaled restraint. Only the briefest flinch, my lip slightly confused by the surfeit. Salt, water, muscle, saliva, fructose. Ask yourself, are you sadder here outside your alliances, weaning me from your thigh, clung on in a soulless coming? Fear sprinkling poison around you. Somebody's near, then when, with a king's ransom, a tongue, paradise, you could hide your life, divide it from a household peopled with closed mouths, my barb fixed to your porous pink. All right. Yeah, so to your question about what happens when you read poems out loud, I typically read them to other people to see how they sound and how I feel about how they sound. So here's a poem in process, a first draft and a later draft. It's not finished. Inside the man undone by marriage. The man is full of a window, scattering his signal nationwide. The window can disappear, unlike when one runs up inside a building. It believes a new theology daily, none with God. It opens with possibility, closes on what could have been in reach if or might, if a swarm of dollars ascended. Outside the window is a faulty plan. Inside the window is a failure, a bubble error about a signal lost. Apathy doesn't fail tests. It doesn't take them. Trust twists both hands up around his back for a nickel. Once our earth was the only thing that let us see face to face, and now a window stills a field of many dying, keeps eyes on an ex-wife watering over this scream or that gasp. The woman is full of a marriage, a mammal, a mattress, a ruby ring, a cuckold. A window can't empty, its contents rearrange. A marriage can be lanced, drained, then folded. The brittle divide can crumble entirely apart. The man has left the window. The man unfolds his marriage, tries to fill it with what a window can hold, an airplane, a futon, a place to frame his daughter. And the window wants its ledge, its viewer, its port to be a portal. Its man lost, connection changed, it thinks, just relax. I'll keep you here. And here's the later draft. Man undone by his second marriage. You have a window inside of you, broadcasting a signal across the nation. It blinks shut and your family asks after you, what number, what series of letters? You believe a new theology daily, but none with the God your mother gave you. Your window opens like a bird mouth, hungry. I wonder what you're eating. Your window closes on a rope ladder like it's a swarm of dollars ascending. Outside the window is half a plan. Inside is a bubble error. You come back and we try to keep the conversation light. Trust twisted both your hands up at the wrists and demanded all of your change. Then your wife flew away. The marriage was packed with mammals, a mattress, a ruby ring, a cuckold trapped on a mountain with a bird she bought. You know a window can't be empty. Its contents rearrange. A marriage can be lanced, drained, and clipped like a blister. You can unfold this marriage, fill it with what a window can hold, an airplane, a futon, a place to raise your daughters. Windows want their ports to be portals. You can nurse lonely. You can reconnect. Let one window close and open the next. Your girls are on the other side of the glass. Let your family pull you through the gap. All right, last one. Initially it was called Space, So I'm going to read this fairly disjointed early draft. There is some sense deep thing about how love begets sex begets love, and we call ourselves by our parents' names. I don't much like to be needed. In the hospital, the man I love lowers his eyes. Syringe, cotton, his father turning. If I were your mother, I'd tell you not to marry my son. You're kind and gentle like he is. My own mother says, I can't stay with a sick man. You want to fix everything. Another day, he says our child would not be black and he means she would be mixed. But we're American, I think, and say she would. Your love can betray your heart. And the final draft. The field of blood. In the hospital, the man I love lowers his eyes. Catheter, cotton. I join his mother for a walk. If I were your mother, I'd tell you not to marry him. My own mother says I can't stay with a sick man. You want to fix everything. But why should we leave good things broken? On some night, my love says I wouldn't want to be black. And I try to understand how we could call blackness the burden and not the whiteness heaped on top of it. Blackness is not a failure of the body. I bleed daily for a month, produce a liver-shaped thing. He rinses his blood with a chemical cocktail every third Thursday. And we make nothing. No child, no pacts, but distance until we both lose. On some day in our home, my love says our child would not be black. But we're American, I think, and say she would. He thinks we understand each other because of his illness and my blackness, but my blackness does not make me sick. Love has betrayed my heart. I'm sure Judas loved Jesus, but fear is a tyrant. In this story, you're Judas, and I'm Judas too. A cynic would say he just loved money more, but what would he say to the field of blood? I loved my man and our cats, but the girl in my chest will always chase the storm in the field. Abandon the ghost in the house. Leave the blood and water running in the bathtub and hair on the floor. Walk into the warm spring night in a blackout. Follow the moon down the sidewalk, eyes glinting like the backyard cougars of my youth. And leave you with your bare heart and your mended bones, waiting for me to come back. A version of me will leave and let the felines starve because the beast in me does not want to be needed. A cat's cry mimics an infant's cry. I like to think I could deny even this.
Thank you, Maya. That line, the beast inside of me does not want to be needed. Thank you very much. Marty?
Okay. I'm going to read two poems, early versions and the final-ish. Okay, so this is hematomancy, divination by blood. First version. Anyone who says they're not interested in divination is a liar or a hedonist. Most of what I've broken has been my own. My maid face melts in the bath, first one eye and then the other. The stuff I've knocked over disrupts the tile pattern of the floor, inviting correction, like this body expanded in inelegant directions, its bones wanting to kill me in the manner of my grandfather and uncle before me. In the ways I am not them, I am this tenacious pothos, rooted in water, sucking nutrients from what sun survives the plastic window. I don't mind dying, but hate to suffer. Sometimes I still feel young, though mostly it doesn't matter. Sometimes I think it's true. I should have been a mother. And then the revision. Hematomancy, divination by blood. Anyone who says they're not interested in knowing what's to come is a hedonist or a liar. Most of what I've broken has been my own: stove, heart, open life, car lock. My maid face melts in the bath, first one eye and then the other. What I've knocked over disrupts the pattern tiled to the floor, inviting correction like this body expanded in inelegant directions. How am I this old and thirsty still? I tug on the tension rod and think I could pull it all down: the marriage, the self divided from self, the bones waiting to kill me in the manner of my grandfather and uncle before me. In the ways I am not them, I am this tenacious pothos rooted in water, sucking nutrients from what sun survives the plasticed window. I don't mind the idea of dying, but hate to suffer and see things left undone. Sometimes I still feel young, though mostly it doesn't matter, since there's poison in the air and extinction forthcoming in the big water. Sometimes I think it's true. I should have been a mother. And it's interesting as I'm like looking at these couple that I've pulled, partly because they're new-ish. So often in my revision process, it's cutting down, but these were more sort of expanding out and being like, what am I avoiding saying? Okay. This is the first draft. This poem: people keep declaring their freedom from things I love. The wide globe of wine each evening, the slip of a razor over calf, making it a sleek thing in a rough world, the small retouched worlds we create to present to each other through screens, womanhood, manhood, gender, and I love them for it. I love how the body transforms by will or time, medicine or poison. I love, or try to, the way my friend whose cancer is back loves every fast second and breath, their surrender to bliss, the essence of their path to survival or transcendence or both. I love those I have lost to death or to too much damage for us to remain in the same room or speak to each other, even as their daughters blossom, even as their faces glide by on tiny machines, aging, glowing, loved. And I love even that with my largest heart, the one with chambers wide and bright enough to hold even those I have never touched or who touched too much, so we will never touch again. Room here for us all, for it all sweetening into the oblivion we know must come before we break into the unknown and perilous, and let it be glorious next. And then the revision. People keep declaring their freedom from things I love. The red globe of wine of an evening, the pass of razor over calf, making it a sleek thing in a rough world, the small retouched worlds we create to present to each other through screens, womanhood, manhood, gender, and I love them for it. I love how the body transforms by will or time, medicine or poison. I love, or try to, the way my friend whose body's cancer is back loves every fast passing second and breath, their surrender to bliss, the essence of their path to survival or transcendence or both. I love those I have lost to death or too much damage for us to remain in the same room or speak to each other, even as their daughters blossom, even as their faces glide by on tiny machines, aging, glowing, loved. And I love even that with my largest heart, the one with chambers scorched wide enough to hold even those I've never touched or who touched too much, so we will never again. Room here for us all, for it all sweetening into the oblivion we know must come before we break into the unfixed and spacious, and let it be glorious next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you, for reading and providing that gift of insight into your process. Let's see. We have some time for some questions from our online audience. In the meantime, if you are in the audience, if you are interested in this work, you can purchase books by both Maya and Marty from our partner, the Seminary Co-op Bookshop. That's at www.semcoop.com. And please check out their work.
And check out the new issue of Underbelly. Sorry, I'm going to plug Underbelly.
Yes, absolutely.
Underbellymag.com.
Can you hold up your the card you showed me when we were testing out?
Yes.
It's such a great piece.
Yeah, there we go. This is a quote from Jericho Brown from his micro essay. I think revision is all about knowing when you're talking and knowing when you're singing and understanding you're not done with your poem until all of it sings, which feels like a dare and a good instruction.
Absolutely. That brings to mind a question. Did either of you have an early influence or advocate that helped you along to learn about revision?
I mean, what comes to mind immediately for me is when I was first moved back to Chicago after undergrad, and I was going to open mics for the first time. There was this woman, Lisa Heminger, who ran an open mic series, and I hadn't really ever thought so much about revision because I just sort of wrote poems for me, blah blah. And one of the things that she always said was, well, there are two things that stuck out. One was to do your best to imagine that you are the star of your life. So to put yourself at the center, and in that way, everything you do, like walking from one room to the other, is significant, right? Like if you're this lead in the movie, like you getting up and looking out the window is significant, right? And so to give every action that kind of weight. And the other was sort of just a practical thing where she was like, if you're stuck, get up and go in another room, see what it looks like in the kitchen, see what it looks like, in the yard, see that sort of thing. So Lisa Heminger.
Very cool. How about you, Maya?
I've had some pretty incredible instructors in my life. I mean, outside of academics, because it's just like good writers around me. I'd say, don't discount the good work you've already done. Most of, everything that shows up on the page belongs there. It's not unrelated because you are the through line, right? It happens to be I've read a lot of associative leaps, and some of them start out very estranged and become much closer over time because I do see a connection. So if I can find that, that's good. So talking to Nikki, Finney, and reading like Richard Hugo got me there.
Are you a fan of The Triggering Town?
I am a fan of The Triggering Town. Yeah. My students are fans too. They're like, oh, okay, so that's what you mean by like imagine the whole world of the poem. Okay, I don't have to shoehorn this into sounding like a particular music. I'll make music out of it because I'm just like roaming around my little town.
We had a comment earlier from Renee from YouTube who said that she liked that earlier analogy about the work being like a baby or a child that you're raising. And I've often thought that sometimes when I'm really battling in revision, for lack of a better word, that it's like your job to get this thing ready to go live on its own without your help. And I'm sure there's a gazillion analogies that we could come up with like that. But as we approach our closing, like any final thoughts? And maybe I'll have one closing question after that. Actually, I'll just say it now. How did you guys meet and hatch this idea?
I'm going to start with a reference to Dirty Dancing. I carried a watermelon. It wasn't a watermelon. I think I showed up to the Real Talk house with like a bottle of wine or something, some normal thing. Marty was running a workshop series called Vox Ferris After Dark. And so I met her, in the company of poets in some stranger's living room. Oh, that's not true. She invited me to that because we met at Columbia College Chicago during the Louder Than a Bomb Youth Poetry Festival. She was leading a workshop, and I thought, oh, this person cares about poems. Let me tell her that I care about poems too.
Yes, that is accurate. Yeah, it was at Columbia College. They had that year, for whatever reason, they were like, let's do a couple workshops for adults in addition to this youth scenario. And yeah, Maya came and said smart things. And I was like, will you come to my other workshops and also say smart things? Yeah. And then we just became friends through that. And I mean, to be totally honest, part of the launch of Underbelly was because Maya was leaving me and Chicago to
For which I'll never be forgiven.
For which she can't be forgiven. And so it was like, well, I want to do this thing. And, I'm not a great keeper in toucher in terms of like consistency and regularity. And I've long known that about myself. And so I was like, if we have a project, it will be for sure that we will, be working together on this for as long as we feel it is serving us and the world. So,
yeah.
Oh, I love that. It's totally born of friendship.
Yeah. Yes. And
Maya, once you're Chicago, you're always Chicago, whether you like it or not.
Right.
Yeah. I've been lucky that way. It's a good town. It keeps bringing me back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any like future goals for Underbelly, or just keep it going, or like any secret desires? Like, I feel like when you do work for Poemland, it's a labor of love, that it's always good to be giving yourself goals or trying to appease your desires. So any comments on that?
I think it would be, so Marty has this really amazing book called Gathering Voices. That's like run your own writing workshop in a box, and it would be wonderful to turn Underbelly into its own set of exercises, so that it's even more functional in people's lives, so they don't have to, we can do the work of saying, here's an exercise from the micro essay by our beloved Jericho Brown, etc. So maybe that'll be something we take on in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things we've talked about, is being pretty happy with how we're able to sort of present it online. But, as paper people, we're also like this desire to have it be, translated to sort of also close that loop. Because right now, the way the website is set up, right, it's here's the initial poem, here's its final-ish version, here's a micro essay about it. And so it's up to the reader, the viewer, to sort of take that and extrapolate how they might use that. But we have done these workshops and know that there are other folks also out there who are taking the work from Underbelly and using it in classroom settings and building exercises off of it. And so to be able to sort of codify that into a book/workbook is something that someone should give us a lot of money to do.
I 100% agree. And I think that really, like, that you've created something that's not just a growing archive, but it really is a resource, is really important. And like, I'm not one of these people who subscribes to the idea that there's too much poetry out there, or the value of it is in its community and in its communication, and we, to me, are living in a world where we can't have too much of these things. So my regards to both of you for creating and feeding this project, because I'm sure it is important to many people, and I look forward to spending more time with it myself.
Great.
Thank you.
Any closing thoughts from either of you?
I like closing with praise for Underbelly. It probably works for both of our souls. Yeah.
Please, everybody, check it out. It's underbellymag.com, and really some terrific people involved, and what a terrific viewpoint that's very unique and differentiating as a journal, and just a lot to be shared there. So thank you very much to Maya Marshall and Marty McConnell. And thanks to everyone who joined us today and even joins us in the future, since this will be archived on our YouTube channel. Thank you to Seminary Co-op bookstores, where you'll find a fantastic selection of poetry books, including books by Maya and Marty. And thank you also to the National Endowment for the Arts, the Illinois Humanities, Vocalo, and to our many generous partners, grant makers, and donors like you who make this festival possible. Please visit our website, litlose.org, for more information about upcoming programs and to purchase tickets to our signature event, the Live Magazine Show, which is this Thursday, November 3rd, at the Logan Center for the Arts, and where you'll find Marty McConnell in collaboration with Mexican artist Hector Jimenez Castillo. Thank you again, Maya and Marty. Everyone, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.